We will be studying Chapter 7, A Visit to Cambridge, from Honeydew. This is the story of a meeting between two extraordinary people, both of them disabled, or differently abled as we now say. Stephen Hawking is one of the greatest scientists of our time. He suffers from a form of paralysis that confines him to a wheelchair and allows him to speak only by punching buttons on a computer, which speaks for him in a machine-like voice. Firdaus Kanga is a writer and journalist who lives and works in Mumbai. Kanga was born with brittle bones that tended to break easily when he was a child. Like Hawking, Kanga moves around in a wheelchair. The two great men exchange thoughts on what it is like to live life in a wheelchair and on how the so-called normal people react to the disabled. Cambridge was my metaphor for England, and it was strange that when I left it had become altogether something else, because I had met Stephen Hawking there. It was on a walking tour through Cambridge that the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking. Poor man who is quite disabled now, though he is a worthy successor to Isaac Newton, whose chair he has at the university. And I started, because I'd quite forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist. Here astrophysicist means a scholar of astrophysics, branch of physics dealing with stars, planets, etc. The author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestsellers ever, lived here. When the walking tour was done, I rushed to a phone booth and, almost hitting the cord so it could reach me outside, phoned Stephen Hawking's house. There was his assistant on the line and I told him I had come in a wheelchair from India for apps. He thought I had propelled myself all the way to write about my travels in Britain. I had to see Professor Hawking. Even 10 minutes would do. Half an hour, he said, from 3:30 to 4. And suddenly I felt weak all over. Growing up disabled, you get fed up with people asking you to be brave, as if you have a courage account on which you are too lazy to draw a check. The only thing that makes you stronger is seeing somebody like you achieving something huge. Then you know how much it is possible, and you reach out further than you ever thought you could. I haven't been brave, said his disembodied computer voice the next afternoon. I've had no choice. Surely, I wanted to say, living creatively with the reality of his disintegrating body was a choice. But I kept quiet, because I felt guilty every time I spoke to him, forcing him to respond. There he was, tapping at the little switch in his hand, trying to find the words on his computer, with the only bit of movement left to him, his long pale fingers. Every so often his eyes would shut in frustrated exhaustion, and sitting opposite him I could feel his anguish. The mind buoyant with thoughts, buoyant means intensely active and vibrant, that came out in frozen phases, and sentences stiff as corpses. A lot of people seem to think that disabled people are chronically unhappy, I said. I know that's not true myself. Are you often laughing inside? About 3 minutes later he responded, I find it amusing when people patronize me. Oh, yeah, patronize means insult. And do you find it annoying when someone like me comes and disturbs you in your work? The answer flashed yes. Then he smiled his one-way smile and I knew, without being sentimental or silly, that I was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world. A first glimpse of him is shocking because he is like a still photograph, as if all the pictures of him in magazines and newspapers have turned three-dimensional. Then you see the head twisted sideways into a slump. The torso is the upper part of the body, shrunk inside the pale blue shirt. The wasted legs, you look at his eyes which can speak still, and they are saying something huge and urgent. It is hard to tell what. But you are shaken because you have seen something you never thought could be seen. Before you, like a lantern whose walls are worn so thin, you glimpse only the light inside, is the incandescence. Incandescence is the inner glow or light of a man. The body, almost irrelevant, exists only like a case made of shadows, so that I, no believer in eternal souls, know that this is what each of us is. Everything else an accessory. Accessory is not essential but extra, though decorative. What do you think is the best thing about being disabled? I asked him earlier. I don't think there's anything good about being disabled. I think I said, you discover how much kindness there is in the world. Yes, he said. It was a disadvantage of his voice synthesizer that it could convey no inflection, no shades or tones, and I could not tell how enthusiastically he agreed with me. Every time I shifted in my chair or turned my wrist towards a time, I wanted to make every one of our 30 minutes count. I felt a huge relief and exhilaration in the possibilities of my body. How little it mattered then that I would never walk or even stand. Just before this, inflection meant rise and fall of the voice in speaking. I told him how he had been an inspiration beyond cliché for me. Cliché is a phrase or idea used so often that it loses its meaning. And surely for others, did that thought help him? No, he said, and I thought how foolish I was to ask. When your body is a claustrophobic room, and the walls are growing narrower day by day, it doesn't do much good to know that there are people outside smiling with admiration to see you breathing still. Is there any advice you can give disabled people? Something that might help make life better. They should concentrate on what they are good at. I think things like the Disabled Olympics are a waste of time. I know what you mean. I remembered the years I had spent trying to play a Spanish guitar considerably louder than I was, and how gleefully I had unstringed it one night. Gleefully means very happily. The half hour was up. I think I've annoyed you enough, I said, grinning. Thank you for stay. I waited. Have some tea, I can show you the garden. The garden was as big as a park, but Stephen Hawking covered every inch, rumbling along in his motorized wheelchair, while I dodged to keep out of the way. We couldn't talk very much. The sun made him silent, the letters on his screen disappearing in the glare. An hour later we were ready to leave. I didn't know what to do. I could not kiss him or cry. I touched his shoulder and wheeled out into the summer evening. I looked back and I knew he was waving, though he wasn't. Watching him, an embodiment of my bravest self, the one I was moving towards, the one I had believed in for so many years alone, I knew that my journey was over for now. Firdaus Kanga, from Heaven on Wheels. So this story is about Firdaus Kanga, who himself lies in a wheelchair, and how he gains inspiration from one of his idols, Stephen Hawking, who is also in a wheelchair. His ideology is that you don't get courage by yourself. You do sometimes, but most often you get it from someone who you can see is in the same position as yourself. So this was the chapter A Visit to Cambridge. Moving on to the poem When I Set Out for Leonis. As a young apprentice architect, British poet and novelist Thomas Hardy once visited a parish to supervise the restoration of a church. On his return from the parish, people noticed two things about him: a new glow in his eyes and a crumpled piece of paper sticking out of his coat pocket. That paper, it is recorded in one of his biographies, contained the draft of a poem. You're going to read that very poem, inspired by a visit to a place which the poet calls Lyonesse, a poem by Thomas Hardy, who was a young apprentice. Apprentice means sort of like an intern, you could say. More than an intern, actually. You could say a kind of a amateur, a skilled amateur. Moving on. When I set out for Lyonesse, 100 miles away, the rime was on the spray, and starlight lit my lonesomeness. When I set out for Lyonesse, 100 miles away. Over here, the rime means frost, so it was basically snowing. That's what the line "the rime was on the spray" means. And starlight lit my lonesomeness, so his journey to Lyonesse was lonely. He himself was maybe lonely in some sort of way, but the starlight, the stars, the light from the stars, in a way, got rid of his loneliness, helped him get rid of his loneliness. What would be chance at Lyonesse? Be chance means happen. While I should sojourn there, sojourn means stay. No prophet durst declare, nor did the wisest wizard guess, what would perchance at Lyonesse, while I should sojourn there. So he goes on to think as to what exactly could happen at Lyonesse when he stays there. No prophet has declared anything, nor has the wisest wizard guessed. No one has predicted what can happen in the future. That's exactly what he's thinking right now. Moving on. When I returned from Lyonesse with magic in my eyes, all marked with mute surmise, my radiance rare and fathomless. When I returned from Lyonesse with magic in my eyes, radiance means glow, and fathomless means so deep that the depth can't be measured. So the last paragraph goes on to say that when he returned from Lyonesse with magic in his eyes, he was marked with mute surmise. He remained quiet and was filled with the radiance rare and so deep that his depth couldn't be measured. This was how he felt when he returned from Lyonesse. A beautiful poem by Thomas Hardy. So this was the chapter, A Visit to Cambridge, and the poem When I Set Out for Lyonesse.